I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help.
Ruby Frank has just been convicted and is getting 90 years in prison.
A wellness visit did occur, but nobody answered the door.
They honestly thought police would be pulling body bags out of their house because that's how bad this was.
Ruby Franke's husband, Kevin, is just as guilty as she is. The 8 passengers family has been through a lot, especially their youngest children. Yet Kevin Franke is acting oblivious to everything, trying to get his kids back while also protecting his problematic wife, Ruby. Both of these parents are at fault here and need to be kept far away from these children. So let's get into it. Everyone has been talking about Ruby Franke and the 8 passengers because it's surprising to see that a YouTube mother who gives parenting advice for her career could be accused of such heinous crimes. And at this point, we've got 6 different charges against Ruby involving starving her children and harming them. These kids are definitely going to need some therapy, especially because part of the problem is that Ruby's business partner, Jody, was also involved in harming these kids. So it's not just their mother harming them, but their mother is sending them off to random ladies to allow them to punish their children.
Ruby Frank has just been convicted and is getting 90 years in prison. We just heard that she has 6 felonies against her, 6 counts of felony child abuse. Along with her being charged, Jody Hildebrand was also charged with 6 felony counts of aggravated child abuse. A local lawyer representing Franke did not immediately respond to NPR's request for comment, and court documents do not list legal representation for Hildebrand, which is very interesting. Both Hildebrand and Franke were still in custody as of Wednesday. Records for the Washington County Sheriff's Office show the pair were scheduled to appear in court before the same judge on Friday. When it comes to 6 counts of aggravated child abuse, if she is found guilty, which there's so much evidence, but if she and Jody are found guilty, each count carries a maximum of 15 years. So in going after this, they went after this hard to give them the maximum. The question is going to be, who's going to get what? I would assume they're both going to get charged something, but I think it's going to get interesting because I have a feeling both women are going to turn on each other. We've heard from the cellmate, possible cellmate of Ruby, and that Ruby was very concerned when it comes to Jody and trying to get glances of her and wanting to talk to her.
Clearly, there are some mental health issues going on here because how do these women treat children like this? And I don't have any sympathy for Ruby, but I do feel like Ruby has some like Stockholm syndrome or some type of like obsession with Jody and trying to get her approval. Each defendant is accused of causing or permitting serious physical injury to the victims in 3 different ways: a combination of multiple injuries or torture, starvation or malnutrition, and emotional harm. Both Ruby and Jody could face up to 15 years in prison. And honestly, I think they should take all 15. Allow these kids to grow up in a somewhat normal environment, and then maybe they can get out and apologize for what they put these kids through. According to inmate records, it looks like Ruby and Jody have remained behind bars since their arrest, and they both recently appeared in court, which they should be kept behind bars because they are a risk.
The first case I'm going to call for initial appearance is Ruby Franke. Miss Franke, can you hear me?
Yes.
I would make one motion. I understand that the co-defendant is assigned to Judge Walton. My case is assigned to Judge Barnes. I would make an oral motion today to transfer this case to Judge Walton so that co-defendants track each other. Okay. My understanding is Ms. Franke is being held on a no bail hold at this point. She's going to remain on a no bail hold for the time being. Thanks, Ms. Franke. That's all for today.
When is it going to start?
Y'all seriously need to be quiet. He's going to kick us all out. He has every right to do so.
Mama.
Please mute yourself and we'll get started as soon as we can.
But Jody is the mastermind here, not Ruby. Ruby is still responsible and like should be arrested for harming her children for sure.
It doesn't seem like anybody's on Ruby's side, which they shouldn't be. Keep in mind that their daughter, Sherry, put out a statement saying that they're so glad that justice is being served. We've been trying to tell the police and CPS about this for years, and I'm so glad they finally decided to step up. The kids are safe, but there's a long road ahead. There's definitely a long road ahead because these kids are going to have to go through therapy and relearn, what it's like to have a normal guardian, not someone who's constantly torturing them. But honestly, shame on this family, like Bonnie, Ruby's sister, who was around, was aware, and didn't really do much, in my opinion.
This week has been nothing that I could have anticipated. I don't think any of us could have really anticipated. If you have the internet, you have seen news articles on my sister, Ruby, from the 8 passengers. And my sisters and I, we are on the very same page. We put out a message. You can read that on Instagram. And for the last 3 years, we have truly clung on to each other and offering support to one another. And I don't think any of us could have ever seen this coming. We all did as much as we could legally, and you don't know what you don't know. I do feel a little bit numb at this point. The only thing that we ultimately care about is that our nieces and nephews are safe, and they are. And that is the only thing that matters to any of us.
Because this is a big family and they are well known because of their YouTube presence, their neighbors have stepped up and left some comments. A neighbor who lived near the family for about 5 years said that the arrest was definitely shocking, but neighbors had noticed some weird things about the family recently. For instance, in the past year, Ruby really started isolating her kids, the neighbor said. Quote, "We saw their presence in the neighborhood almost daily, and then we just quit seeing the youngest two around. That was a big change. For most of us, it didn't point to criminal behavior. It was just curious, like what happened there." Local residents became more concerned when it appeared that Ruby was leaving her 2 teenage daughters alone at home for weeks on end. The neighbor said that this prompted some to contact child services in recent months. I don't understand how Ruby could leave her children behind, let alone where is she going for weeks on end where her kids don't need her? I guess Ruby went down to southern Utah to Jody's home to take the 2 youngest there and left the teenagers home alone up in Springville, which is about 4 or 5 hours away. Quote, "It's odd."
We know about the fact that their 2 youngest children, the 12-year-old and the 10-year-old, were found to be restrained in the house with duct tape around them and both suffering from malnutrition. The neighbors have now confirmed that she would often punish children by withholding food and say things like they're not repenting correctly. They also said Ruby would regularly disappear for weeks at a time, leaving the kids all home alone to fend for themselves. And apparently in 2022, she taped up paper all over her windows so no one could see what was actually going on inside the house, which was also around the time she stopped posting so much on YouTube. The neighbors also saw their youngest daughter Eve wandering the neighborhood alone for hours looking for friends to play with. They said she seemed like a lost child, and they noticed that she clearly wasn't enrolled in school.
Now there's some major problems here when the police and CPS are constantly visiting the home. Springville police visited the home about 15 times between March 2019 through August 31st. In April 2022, the police revealed that CPS had been alerted that there were 2 children running out in the road unsupervised. A caseworker requested that police drive through the area, but the cops never saw these kids running on the streets. Months later, in September 2022, police responded to the home again, this time at the request of Sherry, the oldest daughter. According to reports, neighbors informed her that her younger siblings had been left alone at home for days while Ruby was in St. George with a friend. Officers wrote that they saw the children in the home, but the children would not answer the door. Quote, "Officers seen the children on the phone and go upstairs where they were out of sight." And I'm sure the kids are so scared of upsetting their mother because of how they get punished. When police approached the neighbors who gathered outside, quote, "They immediately started telling us about how the mother of the residents, Ruby, will leave her children at home for extended periods of time and go down to St. George to spend time with her friend, Jody." Quote, "Everyone who came to the scene was very concerned about the children and them being left at home alone." Police call records for the address show that the officers showed up days later on September 22nd, 2022, and then on September 23rd, 26th, and October 3rd. We don't exactly know why the officers were there so often. Clearly, something's going wrong, but we can't, I guess, get that information because of confidentiality involving the minor children.
One of the neighbors just spoke out to the news saying that they were very upset that in the condition that the children were found in, because she's like, "I spoke up. I've been trying to speak up and trying to get the CPS people to do something about it, and they haven't." Apparently a wellness visit did occur, but nobody answered the door, and they just stuck some papers to the door and left. People were trying to do something to save these children. And law enforcement and apparently child services was not taking it serious enough, and the signs were there.
Ruby's always been a very structured person, taking her children to church and making sure everything's in order, even if it is a complete mess. But one red flag that I noticed is that she stopped attending church, which is a big part of their identity. So it makes me believe that Jody really does have some type of odd influence on her. Ruby and her younger children stopped showing up to church, and they didn't see much of the kids outside the home, which, if you guys know, this family is super Mormon, so skipping out on church is a big no-no. Also, I'm assuming that like harming your children is against the Mormon faith as well.
This neighbor has lived near the Frankes for 5 years. She says there was some definite minor red flags, but nobody had any idea that this was happening behind closed doors. She says one of the biggest red flags over the past year was that the two youngest children, so that would be Russell, who's 12, and Eve, who's 10, went from constantly being out in the neighborhood with all the other kids to basically never being seen. She felt that the Frankes were isolating their kids. She also shared that when the Frankes moved in, they completely renovated their backyard and made it kind of like a kid's playground. She said it had a sand volleyball court, a hot tub, even an outdoor pizza oven. She also added that they were teaching their children how to beekeep. She said that they spent a ton of money on the backyard for their kids and they didn't seem to mind doing it. Apparently, the neighbors were all out on their lawns watching the scene unfold when the police arrived at the Frankes' home. She said there was at least a dozen police cars on the scene and officers were in tactical gear, wielding weapons. She said they knew things were serious when at one point the police broke down their front door. The neighbor was quoted as saying, "It's heartbreaking because these are sweet, engaging, innocent kids and good kids."
So at one point, it seemed like the parents were trying to set up this paradise at home for the kids, but I don't think that's actually true. I mean, for instance, supposedly the neighbors say that they were concerned when they saw the kids were pulling weeds out of the yard in 100-degree heat. They were quoted saying, "One thing we noticed, and we told police the same thing, 6 to 8 weeks ago when it was really hot, I was outside in the late morning, afternoon, pulling weeds, and over at Jody's home, several kids were also outside pulling weeds. Over the course of the day, the temperature was over 100 degrees, and I gave up after a while because it was so hot, but I noticed the kids stayed out there. They told Mail Online that they never heard sounds of children playing, though they regularly saw the family's 8-passengers branded van parked outside the residence. Neighbors were concerned by this, which, you know, I mean, people have chores, but what they're talking about is like labor in the heat while it's way too hot, and it just seems like a form of punishment. And even though the neighbors called the police and the police would show up, nobody would be answering the doors, so they weren't really able to uncover what was going on. Quote, in early 2022, it started getting weird. People were concerned because Ruby completely stopped her YouTube stuff, and then it just kind of turned dark. She taped up paper over her windows. She would disappear for weeks at a time, and all these little kids were just left alone in this home. When police finally did step in, neighbors were quoted saying, "Everyone is just breathing a collective sigh of relief because we thought we were going to see some body bags come out of that home." One neighbor said, "I'm really angry because I spoke up and other people spoke up and nothing happened."
They spoke to NBC News and said that they honestly thought police would be pulling body bags out of their house because that's how bad this was. About 6 to 8 weeks ago, one of the neighbors said they saw the kids outside in the garden pulling weeds in the summer heat, except it was over 100 degrees and they were there for hours. The biggest question here though is, if the neighbors saw all of this happening, why didn't they just call child services? Well, they insist that they did, but every time the police would show up, Ruby would somehow find a way to either disappear or make the police actually go away. So she always found a way to evade questioning and further investigations.
So at this point, everybody, including us on YouTube, could see that there is something really wrong here. Records show that the 8-passengers influencer, Ruby Franke, was on police radar for over a year. On top of the 15 police visits, there's also a bunch of call records from the neighbors, from Sherry, the eldest daughter, begging police to step in. And all these records aren't great for Ruby because they show collective evidence that there's been something going on for a long time. So, I mean, personally, I feel like her sick mind is going to try to switch it and flip it onto the kids and make it their fault. But with all of this evidence and so many people speaking out, clearly Ruby is at fault here.
One of my followers was able to get the police scanner audio from when Ruby Franke was arrested.
LT, there's a panic room inside the garage, downstairs underneath the garage. Temple, we've got it, but we can't get into it. My guess is that would be where they're at. He says it's a large room, it's a panic room. I'm at the front door. On this case that we're working, we have the custodial parent of the child in the ER. She just came to our PD and then she took off when we said cops will talk to her in a second. So we're hoping maybe someone can go to the cop at the ER can restrict access from her to her kids. That's something you can relay to them. Her name is Ruby and her name should be in CAD comments.
With all these people talking about Ruby and her family, she clearly had an idea that this was going on. Ruby stated that she received a text message from somebody stating that they were going to take her family down and there will be riots at their door when the world finds out the truth. The person also told Ruby not to let her kids run outside unsupervised and not to post on social media or there would be trouble. According to a private investigator for the family who spoke to the officers, someone allegedly rang Ruby's doorbell, but they were not identified. Ultimately, the investigation didn't result in any arrests. I want to share the 911 call with you guys that led to Ruby and Jody's arrest. And just to give you a trigger warning, it's pretty intense.
911, the address of your emergency. Tell me exactly what's happened.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help. We know there's been problems at this neighbor's house. He's emaciated, he's got tape around his legs, he's hungry, and he's thirsty. And he asked us to call the police. So he's very afraid. This kid has obviously been... I think he's been detained. He's obviously covered in wounds. We need the cops here as soon as possible.
I don't even think we need to say allegedly at this point. I think it's clear that Ruby is a monster, and that's why YouTube has banned Ruby and deleted their channels following this arrest. Actually, a YouTube spokesman named Jack went to page 6 and said that we can confirm that we terminated 2 channels linked to Ruby in accordance with our creator responsibility guidelines, which interesting. I didn't know like if you got arrested you would have your channels deleted, but like I mean in this case I'm all about the censorship because she was pushing really bad parenting skills, not even skills, parenting, I don't know, punishments. YouTube put out a statement saying the mom influencer will no longer be able to use, own, or create any other YouTube channels. So we won't be seeing Ruby on any channels anytime soon, and that's probably for the best because she needs to go and get some mental help.
We just found out the truth of why Ruby Franke had on a medical jumpsuit and is being held in the medical part of the jail. So Ruby comes in, and what a lot of people noticed is that both Ruby and Jody had different suits on. Her suit was like a yellow and black pinstripe suit. And many people were commenting, well, that means she's being held in the medical part. And it looks like that's being true because here's the info that's coming out. Apparently in the medical ward, obviously there's medical issues, but it also has to do with mental health issues, people who are on blank watch and that sort of thing. And what we're hearing is that she is mentally not doing well. She has to be monitored and that this process is giving her a mental breakdown.
So no more YouTube for this family. But one thing I can't really wrap my mind around is what's going on with Kevin, the father of these children. Lawyers for Ruby Franke claim that the husband had no role in this harm and that he's a very gentle person. Now I'm calling BS that he had no idea where his kids were and what were going on with them. I mean, there's absolutely no way, especially because, I mean, it seems like this couple have split up, but it's not confirmed. A source told Insider that Kevin and Ruby are currently still married and he could not speak on their plans to divorce if there are any. He is involved in this court case because of these charges and they are his children, but he's been sworn to secrecy, so he can't really speak about what's really going on. Actually, in an interview on Good Morning America, Kevin's attorney, Randy, described the father as a good person and said that he's been distraught over his wife's arrest last week. Distraught over your wife's arrest? Or the condition that your 2 children are in. Quote, he's a very gentle guy and no one's ever made any allegations that he ever physically harmed any of those kids. He just wants to do what's best for his kids and get them back, get them under his care and his fathership and protect them.
Now we know that Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrand are facing charges, but what about Ruby Franke's husband? According to his lawyer, Randy Kester, the couple have actually been living in separate homes for the past 13 months. His lawyer has also stated that Kevin is very gentle and does not have any allegations against him. Kevin's lawyer is trying to distance him from the allegations and charges against Ruby. However, as long ago as 2020, Ruby Franke was talking about depriving her children of food as punishment on her YouTube channel. And in 2020, her and Kevin were still living together. So even if Kevin didn't physically abuse his children, he did stand by while his wife Ruby did for a period of time. But Kevin did show up in court on September 1st to see what would happen to his children. And also, according to his lawyer, getting his children back and making sure that they are safe is his #1 priority. Ruby has not yet entered a plea of guilty or not guilty, but her court appearance is tomorrow, Friday, September 8th of 2023.
It's smart that he's going with this approach that he didn't know anything was going on because he clearly wants to protect himself, but I'm just not buying it. This report writes that the mom had the kids for the summer and went out of the county with the kids. If he had known of or thought that they were harming the children, he would have been all over it. These children were tortured in a house that was a couple hundred miles away from where Kevin was. But if Kevin is such a gentle and caring father and he wants to protect his children, why isn't he around his children, and why is he unaware of what they're going through? There's no way that the police are knocking on the door and he just had no idea this was going on. Quote, if the allegations are true, his lawyer says, my client has never supported, condoned, or even acted in any physical way towards these kids. He's a good dad, he's a very humble guy, and he needs to get these kids back. I don't think that he deserves to have these kids back, but that's just my personal belief. We have seen him out and about though. He was actually seen at the home in Utah where these kids were supposedly being harmed. You can see Kevin pacing around outside their Utah family home on Saturday as neighbors spoke out about their fears for their children's safety. He came to the house and he actually was removing some of the branding off of their vehicle. They had a car that said like 8 passengers on it, so they were removing that sticker so that I guess they can't be identified. Interesting that he's out at this house and he's now showing face and removing this, you know, this logo from the car, trying to step in and be a good person, but really I think he's working closely with Ruby.
Kevin Franke of the YouTube channel 8 Passengers has been spotted outside of his home in Springville, Utah. He was spotted over the weekend on a phone call wearing his wedding ring. So yeah, he was spotted at the house by the Daily Mail on Saturday. And this was the home that Ruby Franke and all of the children lived in. And all of those 8 Passengers YouTube video was recorded in. He was also seen with a pillow and a travel bag going into the home. In the article, it did state that they were there to remove the 8 Passengers bumper sticker and YouTube bumper sticker from their Explorer van. Obviously, I'm sure he was there for other reasons, but that was one of the reasons. And yeah, just a big thing to me was he was wearing his wedding ring. It's also important to note that him and Ruby are still legally married according to the Daily Mail. Obviously, there's a lot of speculation that they were separated, but they were still legally married when this all occurred.
So there are some updates on the 8 passenger situation. We will be watching this case very closely. Until next time, I'll see you in a new video soon. Bye, guys.